Hey, it's Dr. John Terry, and welcome to another installment of the Tune Into Sales podcast. All of us at Legacy Marketing Group are so excited to have the opportunity to bring this ongoing series to you. We get an opportunity to talk to some amazing people, get an opportunity to hear their story and how they're making a difference in the financial services community. And today, I get an opportunity to interview one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. She and her husband have just become really dear friends in the time I've got to know them. I love what they're doing and looking forward to having an opportunity to talk about an odd subject that maybe we bring into a sales conversation, but it's about administration. It's about paperwork. It's about systems and processes and why they're important. So I'd like to welcome to the stage and welcome to the podcast today, Miss Katelyn Graham. Katelyn, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Dr. John. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, and I am so excited to have you in the room. Now, Katelyn, I want to jump in because we've got a lot to talk about and only a limited amount of time to do that. Now, you run a company called The Admin Effect. I love the name of that. And as I've had an opportunity to follow what you're doing online, I'm one of your raving fans in terms of what you're bringing to the marketplace to make a difference. What is the admin effect, and why is the admin effect really becoming the darling of the financial services industry?
Well, the admin effect was grown and based off of working as virtual operations in advisors' back office. I come from the IMO space, and when I was at the IMO, I really thought I knew what was happening in advisor offices, but it wasn't until I was working as boots on the ground, well, really as virtual ops, that I started to understand the disconnects and the things that were happening in the back office. And it didn't really have to be that way. And one of the big gaps was the training and resources provided to their staff. So we now do the work in advisor back offices, but we also train their staff because, again, there's not a lot of resources to do that particular job in the advisor's back office. It's very unique.
Absolutely. And you know, I come from a sales background, as does your husband, and I know that you've been involved in the IMO space for a while. Sales are the lifeblood of any organization. But one of the things that I teach when I go out and teach sales and marketing is the fact that when it comes to push comes to shove and, you know, stressors begin to happen, deadlines begin to show up, we don't rise to the level of our training. We fall to the level of our systems and processes. Mm-hmm. And when those systems and processes are either incorrect, incomplete, or don't exist, it really impacts how successful we can be in sales. Now,
Yes,
as we look at the industry, what would you say the number one roadblock to financial professionals, insurance, investment advisor, broker dealer, pick the flavor? What would you say is one of their number one challenges that they're running into that's really stymieing their success? Or, you know, what are they doing? Another way to put it is, what are they doing they're putting a roadblock in their own way?
Our financial advisors are mainly, they're more of that sales mind, right? They're type A. They want to meet with their clients and they do a really good job of that. They are the sales. So I call that like the horsepower, right? So if you're picturing like a sports car, the sales, that's that horsepower, right? That's the thing that ramps it up. And that's how you end up, that's where that funnels in. As far as the engine, that is your systems, your processes, your team, the people that are processing all that business or serving your clients, like that is the engine. So what happens when the engine is broken? Does the horsepower really matter that much? You have to have the engine that works to support the horsepower.
So when we look at sales professionals in our industry and we think about the sales process, if I were to pick one area where they're really struggling the most right now, what would that be? What are you seeing at the admin effect?
Their data gathering process or, building process around their sales process. So every advisor has their appointment process. They have their sales process. Let's say it could be, I meet with my client 3 times before I close and make that sale, or I could be someone who meets them once or twice. But through that process where where they're lacking in a lot of offices that we come in is what they should be obtaining from the clients at each stage of that process. So once that client walks out the door, and if you haven't gathered everything that is going to go on to an annuity application, or if you are managing money on the AUM side, if you don't gather all that information and they walk out the door, you have a higher chance of losing that sale because you're not able to facilitate all of the paperwork right after that and get in touch with the client. If you're chasing them down after they've walked out that door, there's a high probability that you could end up losing that sale. So we teach a lot about the data gathering process. We teach admin how to build the process around the advisor sales process, because typically, they're not going to change their sales process. So how do we get what we need on the front end? So then we have all the information to fill out all the paperwork and work with the clients to get it up clean to the insurance carriers through that process. But it all starts at the beginning. It starts through the sales appointment process. So that is the place where, again, we hone in on, because I call it garbage in, garbage out. If what we're obtaining on the front end isn't going to be what needs to go on the applications, then, we're going to have NIGOs.
Right. So is it that they're not asking the right questions, or have they not thought through the questions they need to ask and have put that into a system or a checklist that they can follow so they get what they need, so they don't have to keep going back and asking for more? Is it one, or is it a little of both?
It's definitely they're not obtaining it through that process. So there should be certain touch points. So really, it is the process. So if they don't have a clear process, you should be able to set clear expectations to the client on the front end of what happens in each appointment throughout, what happens as soon as you're moving forward with paperwork, all the way through that process. And we find there's not a lot of that going on in these offices.
Gotcha. Now, do you find that most advisors have a system that they follow from the pre-appointment process to the first appointment process to the follow-up and delivering the solution? Do you find that they wing it more often than they should, or do you find that they've got bits and pieces, but they haven't put it all together so it's cohesive? What do you see?
Bingo, the last one, because they have a process, but a lot of times it lives in their head and they're not sharing it with others, or they're obtaining this information that they don't know what then needs to go on an annuity application. They might have everything they need to do the plan, but it's really getting that process out of your head, knowing that you have the process, and then allowing your team to build in touch points around your sales appointment process to make sure that they're getting everything on the front end. Because the last thing you want is to be chasing down a client when they've already said yes, and now they're on vacation in Europe for 2 months, and you're trying to get all the information to finish up the paperwork. It's just wasted time if you're not getting everything on that front end.
Absolutely. And Katelyn, I think you brought up a valid point. They've got it in their head, but they don't have it on paper. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have it on paper and they get to the point they've got to hire staff, how are they going to train staff on a process that doesn't exist on paper or in a digital document somewhere that they can show a staff member these are the steps in the process to get us from point A to point B, so we ultimately move that individual from being a suspect to a prospect to an opportunity to become a client? That's missing in the marketplace. And I think that's one of the big fallacies and one of the major faux pas that our industry overlooks consistently. Would you agree with that?
Agree 1,000,000%. You hit the nail on the head.
And so the solution to that is what?
The solution is to hire the admin effect.
Important to get those processes documented.
It really is. It's called who, not how. So, their talents as a financial advisor doesn't necessarily translate over to hiring, training, and building out process within their own firm. And I can relate to a lot of these financial advisors because I am a business owner. At the end of the day, they're a business owner. So when they start hiring staff, it's really hard to train someone on a job that you don't really even know how to do very well. So know your resources, because there are firms like mine out there that can help build out those processes, set their team up for success. I would be interested if there was a study or something that showed how many back office support folks, when an advisor is hiring them, how many have worked in an advisor office before? That would be a really interesting statistic to have, because what I find is typically they're not from our industry, or if they are, they're in a very segmented position where, if I work for, let's say, an IMO and I'm in annuity case management, that doesn't necessarily translate right over into an advisor back office. There's a lot to learn behind there. So I always say it's a very unique job to work in an operations position in a financial advisor's back office.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, if failing to document processes is the number one roadblock that advisors put in their own way, if you were to look at the experience that you and the admin effect have, what would you say is the number two problem that we see many advisors and agents overlooking in their business that goes beyond just not documenting process? What would you say is the second saboteur that they put in their own way?
I'd say knowing what to track. So traditionally, our financial advisors, they're tracking their marketing dollars, their, what they're paying out on the sales side, but they're not necessarily tracking what happens after they make that sale. So one thing that we teach offices is you need to be paying attention to the moment the advisor makes that sale, to the very first touch point with that client after the sale. So if we're going to facilitate the next steps, let's say we're putting money into an annuity, we're putting money into Fidelity. Well, that next touch point matters. So we've gone into offices where it's taking 5 to 7 days for that office to reach out to that client. That's a big window of time for that client to all of a sudden have a ton of questions, want to meet with the advisor again. So tracking from the point of sale to the first touch point, whether it's facilitating that paperwork, to how long it's taking to fund either the AUM or annuities. How long is it taking there? So if we're not tracking those numbers, people don't even know their cycle times and why it's taking them so long to get paid. So again, point of sale to the first touch point, paperwork going up, to how long it's taking to fund the AUM or annuities. Those are very, very important. So when we come into organizations, we are looking at those numbers because our goal is to cut that time frame down significantly.
Absolutely. Now, one of your phrases that I love, and we talked about this early on in your business model, was NIGOs to IGOs. Mm-hmm. And I love that phrase. But I don't know, for those that haven't really thought through what that means and the value of getting an application to the home office in good order. When you first start working with an advisor group, an agent group, or an agency, whatever it may be, what do you see as far as percentage of business in good order versus business not in good order? And again, is it processes? Is it systems? What's the problem?
Well, I have a really good example, actually. So I'm hosting trainings here at our office for advisor back office staff. And we had some folks in, and this one gentleman, he had been working for this advisor office for maybe 4 weeks before he came out to our training. And one of the first things he was handed was a replacement application. Now, just saying, when I ask, what do you think a replacement application entails? What is one thing that you really have to know in order to fill out a replacement application?
You got to know where the money's coming from.
That, and you have to know product. You have to understand what is the client going into, where is the money coming from, and what are the features of those products. If I don't know annuity products and I'm going to go try to fill out an annuity replacement application, I'm going to get a ton of NIGOs because I don't even know what these products are. How do I answer these questions? That is the reality of what's happening in these back offices. And then advisors get frustrated with these folks because they're like, annuity apps are so easy. Well, they're really not. I know at one point in time, they were maybe well, I think they're actually in the back of a magazine, a one pager that someone could fill out and submit. Then maybe they're 4 pages. Well, now it's 60 pages of information that the carrier wants to know. What are the client's objectives? What's their current financial situation? What are they looking to do? If it's coming from somewhere, they want to make sure that the client knows what they're giving up to then go into this new product. It's really important stuff. And you can't have someone who's inexperienced try to fill out paperwork, because they're going to get a ton of NIGOs and it creates a poor client experience at the end of the day.
Do you find paperwork issues also being a problem? I know suitability is a big issue. And, as we're a regulated industry, we see suitability continuing to expand, making sure that the agent or advisor is doing the right thing with respect to the client. But do you find that there's a lot of little major mistakes or minor mistakes that keep happening over and over and over that cause those NIGOs not to happen?
Yes. So I always say our industry does not make it easy for people to do this job. A lot of these advisors are using multiple carriers, different products, and there's absolutely no consistency in our space when it comes to these applications or, even what certain carriers interpret on applications. So it's not easy to fill this out. In my course, I even go over the different languages on different applications and how it means the same thing. So if you don't understand exactly what that is, it's hard to combat what's flying at you. So I would say, understanding what you're doing, understanding what these questions mean, understanding why someone would purchase these annuities, understanding the why behind everything is what will set someone up for success. Because the inconsistencies of, again, how things are asked, the different terminology. One carrier could call an income value a protected income value. Another could call it an income benefit base. Another one could call it just the income value. So you have to understand what that value means across the board versus getting tripped up by all the language that's out there also.
I 100% agree with that, and I remember as you were talking, I remember going back, I've been in this industry since the late 1980s. And I
wouldn't
remember
believe that.
I 29 and holding. What can I say? But back in the day, if we want to call it that, annuity applications when I started were one page. It was a one-page application, and on the back was the transfer paperwork. Today, it's 30, 40, 50, 60 pages to complete an application to satisfy all the state requirements to make sure we're doing what we need to do. And that becomes a problem. And it's one little box missed or one little phrase not explained, or as you said, not understanding the language and giving the carrier what they need to make an informed decision. All that slows the process down.
Well, and understanding that the suitability section on an application is utilized for multiple products. So the questions on there, if you don't know exactly what that product is for, you could be answering a ton of different questions wrong on there because it's a universal form. My example would be if, let's say someone's electing income and you need to understand that income rider, because an application can ask, when does the client plan to take distributions? And the answers may be 0 to 1 year, 1 year, or 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10, whatever it is. But if I select 0 to 1 and that rider you can't even turn on till the 5th year, then you're having to go back and get corrections on that application. Or you'd be questioning, is that even the product for them if they wanted it in the first year? But that's how easy it is. If someone doesn't understand the riders, if they don't understand the rules of this product, they're going to have a hard time filling out the suitability portion of the app.
100% agree with that. And I think too, I was at the Vault conference this last week with Patrick Bet-David, and he was telling a story of the early days of PHP, the big monstrosity that he built in the industry. And he was talking about the fact when he first got involved in the insurance business, he didn't understand systems and processes. And he said, I remember an application coming in, and he says, we're seeing this long delay time before people were getting paid. And he said, I asked my staff, how long does it take to process an application? And it was taking 4 days from the time that app hit to getting all the additional information from that agent that they needed to actually get everything they needed to put that file together, review it, make sure it was in good order, and then ultimately send it to the carrier. So think
Mhm.
about the customer experience in that regard.
Yeah.
If you're constantly having to go back to the consumer and ask them for, oh, now I need this, or oh, now I need that, or now I need this piece of information, what does that do in terms of your competency as that client looks at you? It begins
Mhm.
to make them question, did I choose somebody who really knows what they're doing? And I think the same applies
Exactly.
for staff as well. Would you agree?
Yes, 1,000,000%. I mean, being able to articulate to the client or build out the best processes, it starts with that understanding. But the client experience is so important, and it doesn't have to be where you're going back and forth, but you have to know what you need. You have to know what you should be obtaining. And it, again, you don't just show up and know an advisor back office. So instead of learning from trial and error over years and years, that is why I'm so passionate about sharing our knowledge with this space, because we can amp up how quickly they learn something, and they don't have to try to figure it out over a 10-year period, dealing with all the things that can happen from a poor data gathering process, or not understanding, again, the products or the things that need to go into these applications. I mean, something as simple would seem simple now to me, but something I teach on is reading statements. Looking at a statement, what really do I need to know about this that applies to the annuity application? A client can bring in an account summary. Well, that's not the same thing as a statement. So understand that if you're getting that on the front end and you notice that that's not a statement, then you can combat that while the client is there, or before that next appointment that they're coming in. But you have to know that in order to combat those things to make that client experience better.
Yeah. So how does the admin side impact the annual review that should be taking place?
Well, the advisors typically are asking their staff to go obtain all the values, right? So it's really important to a financial advisor to have all of the values for their planning. So let's say they're looking at their RMDs or their income part of it. Like, they're looking at everything for like tax purposes, and they need all these values from everywhere to really look at their entire plan, and everything affects everything. So I've found, in training, that it's not really an entry level position to just go call on values. They still have to know what they're calling on. They have to understand those products. They have to understand what these values mean. But so I'd say it's one of the most important jobs, is understanding that and being able to obtain the correct information from the carriers.
Absolutely. So let me pivot just a little bit, because I know many financial professionals, when they got in this industry, they were solopreneurs and they began to grow their business. And maybe on the annuity side, maybe they've gone from being $1 million a year producer to now they're doing three, four, five, and they realize they've got to hire staff because they can't grow because they're getting overwhelmed and they can't do everything they need to do.
Right.
And we talked about systems and processes and why they're important, but why is delegation of services so important? And why is empowering those team members you hire to go do what you've hired them to do? Why do so many financial professionals struggle to do that? And what does that cost them when they don't?
I always say knowing how isn't the same as showing how. So what I find is sometimes when advisors hire staff, they have a hard time training them. They don't have the actual role built out because they're just drowning. It's a good problem to have. They're growing. They have more business than they can handle themselves, but they're not really set up when they bring someone in, that they have it written out exactly what that person's expected to do, and they don't have the proper training. So over time, that person, if they aren't living up to these expectations the advisor has, the advisor might look at them as an expense versus an investment into their firm, when really you need to invest in your people. You cannot continue to grow without staff. And that's just the reality of it. But you have to learn how to, like you said, delegate, but you have to have the resources to train them, because you're not going to delegate to people that don't know what they're doing. You're going to be just keeping the work, and then that's just a vicious cycle. So if they don't have the confidence to train their staff, that's why we exist. Send them out to our training. But the only way you're going to continue to grow is by delegating, but you have to have that trust in your people. to really
Yeah,
delegate.
I agree. I think it's not just delegating. I think it's also equipping and empowering. Because if you
Exactly.
just say, okay, Katelyn, this is yours, and I don't teach you how to do it, I just set you up for failure. And as a result of
Exactly.
that, it makes you look bad. It makes me look bad. It makes my company look bad in front of my customers. That's a
Mhm.
no-win scenario. But I think there's far too many financial advisors that don't think into what you're saying in terms of giving that associate that they bring on their team what they need to be successful so they can own that role and make that advisor look like Superman or Superwoman every time they walk in the door.
Exactly. Because what happens is if they hire one person and that person just starts taking some things over and then they continue to grow and they hire another person, well, now there's crossover in the role. Nothing's really mapped out. There's no role clarity. And I always say, if no one owns it, everyone feels it. So it's really important to have role clarity, have it mapped out what each person's doing and why it's so important to the vision and the whole entire organization.
So it really comes back to the why that you said earlier.
Mhm.
If they don't know why it's important, they're not going to know how to make it important.
Exactly. And I learned this from firsthand experience in growing my team in my firm. When I first started hiring, I hired a VP. I didn't know what I was meant by that at the time. I just knew I maybe wanted them to be helping manage a team of account executives. It took me about 2 years and running through the EOS, the entrepreneurial operating system, to really dive in and really take my vision and become clear on how I share that with my company, running them on systems, having that role clarity, mapping out what their contribution means to the big picture. That has just skyrocketed and that's the only reason I've been able to scale. You have to have that clarity. And even as things shift and change, to be able to say, this is why this is happening, and this is why we're moving in this direction, that everyone gets on board when they understand. It's that lack of understanding it can be detrimental to your staff, to the whole organization, to your clients at the end of the day.
So what I hear you saying is it's important to train, but as the organization continues to grow, that training has to evolve because as you bring on multiple team members, there's multiple dynamics in place. And if
Mm-hmm.
you want a high performance, non-leader dependent team where everybody's owning their responsibility, training has to be ongoing, correct?
Correct. Mm-hmm. 1,000,000%. But you have to understand what you're asking of your staff first.
And where does that start? Does that start with you as the financial professional, the business owner? Does it start with you?
It Yes, they need to understand what they're hiring for, and they have to really map out those positions within their company. And maybe the first person you hire, you're not there yet. You really are just delegating certain things to get off your plate, but keeping that in the forefront of your brain to know as you grow, you are building out a structure within your company. And if you're not, then there's no clarity of what people are doing. And I've done consulting in advisor offices where I've come in and they have, three people on the team and they have a senior director of ops and a director of ops and then a wealth advisor. So it's like, how is there a senior director and a director of ops? Well, they got to pick their titles, was how that went down. So, but there was no clarity on who's doing what. And it just evolves that way when you just don't know what you don't know. So that's why I highly recommend reading Traction by Gino Wickman. I run my company on EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. That will give clarity on how to set this up because it doesn't seem like rocket science once you're doing it, but it actually takes a long time to set up and it's very methodical and thought out to set your company up for success.
Cool. So let me ask you this. If there was one success tip, I've got a financial professional listening today and they're like, I've never thought about any of this before. I've been a one-man band my whole life. And I understand why I can't scale beyond where I am right now. If there was one success tip that you would give them to say, start here, do this first, and here's what you're going to get as a result of that, what would that be?
I would say if you're hiring your first person, or you're hiring someone in your back office, I always think about who, not how. Who can help me get there, not how am I going to get there? So know your resources. Know that you can send your folks to training. You have resources with the admin effect. That's where I would start. And then I'd go on to talk through the consulting side of it to make sure that I'm setting up my business for success from the structural standpoint. Or if you hire a director of operations that's going to help you, or a chief operating officer is going to help build that out, you can send them our way as well, and we'll help them structure that. But don't feel like you have to do it yourself, because that may take away from the sales you're doing. You can always outsource.
Yeah, the Pareto principle comes into play here, because if you can spend 80% of your day in the 20% of what you're best at doing, and get other people that can do the 80% of things you're not as good as doing, and let them own that role, now you've got an opportunity to be more successful than you would be otherwise. I think that's huge.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's huge. Well, Katelyn, if somebody wants to learn more about the admin effect, and they want to learn more about who you guys are, what you do, and the amazing team of folks that you've got working there, how do they do that?
Well, I'd say you can start by going to our website at www.theadmineffect.com, and you can book a call right there through our website. It's our Connect call, or you can reach out on LinkedIn. But I'd say that's the best place to go, is to go to our website and get your Connect call booked with my team.
Perfect. So if there's something you wanted to share on the podcast today that I didn't ask, that you can leave our audience with today, what would that one thing be?
You're not alone. It is its own beast when you're building out a business. So when you go from a solopreneur, how did you say it? A solopreneur?
Solopreneur. Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah.
To building out a team, that's a very different ball game. So know that you don't have to do it on your own. You have resources just like the admin effect out there, and we can guide you through that, because it is a lot when you're building out the infrastructure of a business to scale.
Absolutely. Well, Katelyn, I want to say thank you for your time. I mean, this episode could go for another 45 minutes or an hour. There's a lot we could really dig into here, and there's a wealth of knowledge inside that head of yours that I'd love to begin to pull more out of, and hopefully we can have you come back for another episode in the future. But I want to say thank you for being a part of our podcast today. And on behalf of all of us here at Legacy, I'm Dr. John Terry. I want to say thank you for joining us today. We look forward to having you on our next installment. Thank you for joining us, and have a great day.